like to have everybody introduce themselves not only by their own name, but if they have an affiliation with the organization, to please state that too. And if you have any particular request on behalf of your organization, make it now and brief. Thank you. Elaine Chapnick, President of the local summit. Oh, I'm here. Why don't we take the portable mic?
Harold,
Manis Pipeline, retired.
Sabrina Fiddleman, local summit. Nancy Seligson, supervisor-elect of the town of Mamaroneck. Good morning, Debbie Minetta, director of public information for Mamaroneck Schools. And I just want to take this opportunity to let you know I put a little flyer right here at your seat announcing our December 5th community engagement meeting around the tax cap. And Dr. Chaps will be speaking more about it, but just wanted to make sure that we invite you all to attend. We hope you'll attend. We've titled it Property Tax Cap. It's here, now what? So we'll be talking about the implications of the tax cap today, tomorrow, and in the years ahead in terms of our budgeting multi-year. So again, Dr. Chaps will talk more about it, but it's December 5th at 7:30 p.m. in the Homix Library. So we hope you'll all be able to make it. Good morning, Christine Udell, President of Larchmont Mamaroneck. PT Council, Communication. Nina Cutting.
Greg Howells from the Rye YMCA.
Robin Nichinsky, currently president of the Mamaroneck School Board.
Lynette C., Mamaroneck School Board trustee.
Rena Theater, Larchmont Mamaroneck.
Vice President. She was vice president. She's
Stella Markey, Director of Staff Center.
Luis Quiroz, President of the High School Padres Unidos, an active participant in Occupy Wall Street.
Andrew Andrews, Summit, and generally unaffiliated.
Brian Donnelly, reporter for the Daily Mamaroneck, published by Main Street Connect.
Paige Rent with the Town Report.
Debbie.
Teddy Becker, Summit, and at home on the Sound.
Jeffrey Reener, Summit, and his management of Sanders.
Marlene Colbert, I'm a trustee in the village of Larchmont, and 100 years ago I was president of the school board.
Penny Over, former board president and
I
former
was there again.
summit member.
John Bradley at home on the Sound.
Kate Francis Richards, Mamaroneck Larchmont Human Rights Committee, and the Summit.
Sanger with
breakfast. Can we stay local for Thanksgiving? Yeah. How about you? Yeah. Son's coming in from California. So. Yeah, I don't have to drive around too much, thank goodness.
Paul Abramson, the Neanderthal president of the
Bob Hayden, Summit, at home in the Sound.
How's that? Home in the Sun? I don't know what that is.
Mary Lee Barrage,
Good,
keeper
thank
of the money, please raise your hand.
I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
All right, well, we're just very happy to see that. I represent the Summit and Women's Club and Interfaith, and Interfaith has a community service on the 22nd, that's 2 days before Thanksgiving, St. John and Paul, 7:30. I hope everybody will think about that, especially this year. Thank you.
Heidi Sickle, Summit Board member. I'm today's moderator, and I'm the past president for the Rhinex School Board.
Iris Reed, Hope Community Services.
Melvin Freed, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the Larchmont Softball Club.
He said softball.
Aaron,
Good morning, Keith Geiser, Mamaroneck Public Schools Summit, and Rhinebeck graduate.
I want to thank all of you for coming this morning, this almost summer morning. Wonderful November morning. Pardon me? Jeremy. He did. He introduced himself. He introduced himself too. There's a buzz, and so people can hear him. So thank you. I want to again thank everyone for coming. Today's topic, the schools, is the topic that certainly unites all of our communities around a common interest, and also it's the agent for creating our future citizens. And today we're going to hear the state of that and those institutions. Heidi, I'm going to turn the program over.
I'm good, thank you. No, I'm not going to eat, thank you. I'm good.
Almost daily, there's an education story in the press. The changes with the tax cap, the Long Island cheating scandal for the SATs, changes in curriculum, changes in testing, national curriculums. And I know when I read these stories that are state, county, or even national, I think, what does it mean for my schools? What does it mean for our school districts? And luckily today we have the leaders with the answers.
It's good you came, Bob.
We have Dr. Peter Mustick, who's superintendent of schools at the Rhinebeck School District.
Good morning.
And Dr. Robert Schaps, who's the superintendent of schools for Mamaroneck.
Good morning.
And we're going to start with Dr. Mustick, followed by Dr. Schaps. And although I'm sure each of them could do a 2-day seminar for us, we've limited them to 15 minutes each. And that should give us about a half an hour for questions and answers. So if you have a question, just hold it to the end and we'll make sure we get to it before we close. So, Dr. Mustick, I'm going to start with you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Heidi. I guess I need to hold this. Good morning, thank you for inviting us.
If you want, yeah, you can put it in there. Should work.
And Heidi's right. We probably could talk for a couple of days about what's happening in our schools. And given superintendents' propensity to talk, we probably would be here for a few days. Just thank you for having us this morning. Public education, as you may be reading about and hearing about, is really under attack today. And it's under attack for all the wrong reasons. But I'm going to ask you a question first. How many people have moved to these communities, moved to Mamaroneck, as a result of wanting their kids to be in a better public school? How many people just moved here or lived here and are proud of their public schools? Well, what's going to happen over the next few years if this is true, if the tax cap happens the way we predict it will happen, or what the governor is talking about, the tax cap? We will end up with schools like New York City. Schools where people ran away from to the suburban communities. The tax cap implication will be very simple. It will turn our schools into, will turn our communities and our schools into boroughs. It's not a complex decision, it will happen. Because the real question, and I hear this over and over again when I hear the governor speak or when I hear people speak about tax cap, is you can do more with less. And to some degree that's right. We can trim, we can be more careful, we can watch dollars maybe more carefully. But in the end, what you do with less is less. You don't do more with less. There is no way to create opportunities for students without money. Now, many of you, when you were members of school boards or when your kids were in school or when you were in school, schools ran in a certain way. They weren't open 24/7. My school district now, as it stands, is open weekends for activities, nights for activities. During the summer, we have programs running. We run opportunities for kids for breakfast programs, for lunch programs. We take care of medical needs. We have psychologists on staff. We have many, many sports on staff. All good things that help our young people improve in a very complex world. Very different from when I went to school. Very different from, I think, when you went to school, and maybe from when your kids went to school. A very different look at what we expect of our schools. Now we can dial that back. We can change that dramatically. And we probably will as the money begins to dry up. But what we will end up with is much less than what we expected when we first moved to these communities. And the interesting thing about this tax cap discussion is that people believe that in the end, taxes will be less. Well, you're still going to be paying a lot of money in taxes where you live. The difference will be that you won't have the quality schools that you presently have in place. Now, I do this thing, I'm sure Bob does, we all do as superintendents now, we're always selling our schools to various places. So I go to real estate offices about once every 3 weeks and meet with the realtors about what's happening in the schools to promote our school system. Interestingly enough, every one of the realtors tells me it's so important that we have quality schools because that sells homes. And we all know that is true. So the downside of the tax cap for many people, even if you're not benefiting directly from public education, is that the value of our homes is based on what happens in our schools. People can choose to live in Mamaroneck or Rye or White Plains or Mount Vernon depending on what they want to spend on their house and what they intend to do with their children as they come to schools. So this isn't really a very complex problem. We know there's this terrible economic situation. We know the state is having trouble in terms of finances. Not a big surprise. How do we best manage that? As I look at our district, one of the oldest districts in New York State, I can say that because most of the records in Albany burnt in the 1800s, so there's no guarantee about what that happens. You can't check that. But it is one of the oldest districts in New York State. When I look at our district with 1,500 students and about 200 staff members, we have a tremendous ability to manage and control and personalize what happens in our schools. It's very different from what happens just down the road, where there's a variety of opportunities for kids in a very different way. So what we offer is a unique niche and a personalization for our schools. Bob and the Mamaroneck schools offer something completely different. Each school district in Westchester offers a unique opportunity, and people come here purposely for that. They choose their homes based on what they want for their students. That's going to change. I fear that we will become another borough. We'll become the borough of Westchester. I grew up in Westchester. My parents didn't move here based on the fact that they wanted to live in one of the boroughs. The purpose was we wanted garbage collection. They wanted good schools. They wanted roads taken care of. They wanted police protection. But most importantly, they wanted local control. They wanted the ability to be able to talk to the mayor, to be able to talk to their local legislators, the ability to talk to the school superintendent. They wanted that intimacy, and that makes a difference. It makes a difference in communities' feeling. It makes a difference for students. Every day, it makes a difference. I have the great good fortune to interview every graduating senior from our school district. I've done it since I've been superintendent. It's the best use of my time in the month of February, and it is the best learning experience I can have. And they tell me two things. The best thing about Rye-Neck is that it's so small that everybody knows everything. And the worst thing about Rye-Neck is it's so small and everybody knows everything. But they say it in just that way. They appreciate the connection between adults and students. So when you hear all of the things about how schools are failing, it's not the Mamaronecks of the world, it's not the Rye-Necks of the world that are failing. We're succeeding. We have the model for success. And you can be very proud when people talk about our schools because they are successful places. Our students are succeeding. They're doing well in terms of college readiness. They're doing well as citizens. They're nice kids. And as a result, that comes as a result of a community effort. We all have that responsibility to educate the next generation. And that's our role and responsibility. And depending on how we do that in our communities, should be in the hands of the local people who are controlling that. You in this room, our community residents, our school boards, who work so hard at doing that every year, are the people that can make those decisions and make those decisions well. You know, every time there's an issue, it's certainly something that people pick up the phone and call me, or call one of our school board members. I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to reach the governor in weeks. He doesn't take my phone calls. So the difference between that local control and the ability to talk to somebody who can make a difference or who can make a change is what Westchester's about, is what our school system's about. From my point of view, we're going to have a number of challenges. The tax cap is going to change the landscape. Not right away, slowly, over a period of time. And as that happens, it's going to be worse for those districts that have the highest need in the county, I will tell you that. It will be less for districts like ours, but it will happen to us as well. And then people will begin to make decisions. You don't have to look too far to see what happens when public education begins to not get the funding. If you haven't looked, look at what happened in California. Look at what happened to one of the strongest public school systems in the country that's now one of the worst school systems in the country. And, you know, when people begin to make decisions based on the fact that they can afford to make those decisions, then we really begin to do away with what the whole purpose of our democracy is about. When you have the haves and the have-nots. Those people who are able to educate their students and those people who can't, or are stuck in a system that's less than. So part of what we're doing in Rhinebeck is we're using this as an opportunity in many ways. We're looking carefully at every dollar, but we're working hard at two other things. We're working hard to hold our legislators' feet to the fire about mandate relief, which is what we were promised when this all came to be. So we're putting together a task force of superintendents. We've developed a position paper and a simple sheet with 4 or 5 mandates that can start us on the road to making this better and possible to work. Our unions have been cooperative and are working with us. So we have a relationship with that. We're working with, we don't want our facilities to fail. I mean, I laughed Sunday when I opened the paper and I saw the article about the failing school facilities. I'm saying to myself, well, how does this play out? Tax cap and schools falling apart. Yeah, because if you don't have money to fix things, then things start falling apart. So we're going to keep needing to keep fixing our infrastructure. That's an important component of what happens to schools. I say it all the time. You need to fix the curtains and you need to fix the boilers. So you need to fix things people see and things that they don't see. That's part of what happens in an organization. You can all be proud of what you have accomplished over the years that you've provided service and dollars to support your local public schools. My fear is that this tax cap unfairly takes that local control away and puts it in the state's hands. That's my start of the tax cap.
Good morning. Before I begin, I just want to take the opportunity to introduce Assemblyman George Latimer's here. Some people who came in as we started. So, George, thank you. We have Board Vice President Nancy Pearson, I noticed, arrived as well. And I think a few others. So, Judy Myers is here. Thank you, Judy. I didn't see you as well. So I just, congratulations on your election. So, on the way over here, it was interesting this morning. I was listening to the radio, and I was struck by a comment of a CEO of a company who made a purposeful decision to remain in the tri-state area instead of moving out west, where there was, I think, more advantageous economic situation in terms of building a business. And what struck me was that right from the get-go, the CEO was able to say, we are committed to being the greenest electronics provider in the next 20 years. And so it was clear that his mission statement, or what he felt the essence of the company, was quite clear and evident. And everything that they were going to do to support and to accomplish that mission was clear, to at least to me, listening in the drive-in. And I was struck by the comment about agents for educating the citizens of the future. And I do think we've been kind of mired in these conversations about dollars and cents, about mandates, and about tax cap. And we, in some ways, are losing sight of what is really important. That is investing in the future. And schools are about investing in children for the future and providing opportunity. All of us attended schools, and certainly we recognize the importance of an education, how it not only in some ways sets our path for the future, but it represents the strength of our country, our ability to grow as a community as well, and the vitality that is attached to what it means to be a part of a community, and now a broad world community. That being said, I think the work that we do in our schools is incredibly important. And our primary mission is to, in some ways, impart that message to our citizens. We understand clearly that these are challenging fiscal times, that the idea of that we can continue to grow and expect citizens to kind of deal with the challenge of rising taxes is incredibly, what I would say is cumbersome, but also is serious because it speaks to the ability for us to sustain and remain a vital institution. Our job, I think, moving forward is to, one, be purposeful in identifying what we're about, what we need to do to help our students continue to at least have opportunities in the future, and then to be able to take that mission and that vision and apply it to how the schools are going to deal with the challenges they face. So in Mamaroneck, we have spent the last 6 months trying to understand what is the tax cap. How do we look at what I'd say is a multi-year strategy to understand what we're what we have to live with and how we have to operate under the conditions that will provide what we say is an artificial ceiling and in some ways not allow us to deal with the larger picture or problem that we're facing. That is pension costs, that is mandates, that is certainly providing our working conditions for our employees that are competitive, that will attract and be able to maintain quality workforce. We're dealing with the challenge of rising healthcare. And so we have to really look at all of those challenges and come up with a strategy that first and foremost will allow us to maintain the quality of our programs and certainly personalize the educational for our students and meet their individual needs. And I think that's what we all struggle with. But more important, I think, our work is to educate the community, to have them understand that the solutions are not going to be easy. As Peter mentioned, that we all know eventually this is going to impact our budgets, whether it's this year or in the next several years. And we have to kind of figure it out because we are in some ways stuck in this kind of reality. And I will say that last evening I had the opportunity to talk about my experience in Massachusetts. And I will tell you that, as Peter mentioned, just as we look at California and the challenges of public education in the state of California, certainly in Massachusetts, with Proposition 2.5 override since 1981, there have been a number of challenges that school systems faced trying to live within an artificial cap that deals with what I think is the symptoms and not the larger problem. That being said, I have to say that we're off to a great start of the school year. I think our view and my conversation with the board and our administration is how do we find opportunities at a time of challenge? How do we start to build what I would say is an institution that is looking far into the future, that is 5, 10, 15 years ahead, knowing that we're trying to educate students today for the jobs of the future that we're not sure what they're going to look like and what we're going to expect students to know and demonstrate and understand. And so my message, at least, is that we feel it's been a terrific start of the school year. As Peter mentioned, we are doing things in our schools that 10, 15 years ago, a lot of us couldn't imagine. We are, whether it's original science research, whether it's what I would say our Mandarin program, whether it's our music program in the arts, we are trying to provide our students what I think is a broad experience, but certainly give them an incredible foundation where they will be successful in the future. A couple of things I wanted to touch on. Peter mentioned the governor, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is that we have been inundated with a lot of top-down initiatives, changes to what I would say is our APPR, or evaluation system. Commitments about this linear improvement through No Child Left Behind that somewhat, in some ways, drain not only our resources because we're expected to meet these requirements, but also I think they help us, they force us to lose sight of what's important. And that is really the quality of education and the quality of teaching. So we have in some ways tried to stay true to our philosophy, what we believe is important around good teaching and learning, to try to work within what I would say is the limitations of the frameworks that's coming from Albany, but try to in some ways remain positive and feel in some ways that we can control our own destiny and fate. Debbie mentioned that on December 5th we're going to engage our community in a discussion about living within a tax cap, and I think it's equally important not only to have a multi-year strategy, but it's also important to educate everyone in our community to understand what this means, how it will impact our schools, and what we need to do together to really kind of understand, in some ways, the potential harm that's going to happen from what I would say living within this 2% environment. And so it is a time where we need to build coalitions. It is a time where we need to seek input and advice from our citizens to try to understand their perspectives. And what I think we can do is find creative solutions to a difficult challenge. And that's what I certainly would ask of all of you as we go forward, how you can participate in this discussion. I think the last thing I'll say is that it is about public engagement and it is about public discourse. And the schools have the advantage of, as Peter said, opening up our doors both during the day and the evening to all of our stakeholders to start to engage in conversations that are meaningful and that provide opportunities to build for the future and not necessarily tear apart. And that's what we hope to do. So we look forward to your participation, and certainly feel free to ask us any questions or communicate through us by phone or stop by the office as well.
Got plenty of time for questions. So, Mr. Kiros, I'm going to give you this. You have to kind of hold it very close.
I have written often on the subject of public schools. I mean, really often, going back at least 20 years and 15 years, about 20 years in this community, when I predicted that we'd be in this situation today. We had about 1995, 6, something called funding, equity funding for public schools. And I have often stated that our nation is defined by public schools. As our public school goes, so does this nation. And I think we have to be concerned when I predicted we'd be here today, and I try to get advocacy and a lot of people to join us, and I actually use the word Robin Hood, that I dislike the use of Robin Hood approach in economics for our public schools, take from the wealthy to give to the other communities, that there's a way of doing it better if we participated in that process. And obviously we didn't, and now we're getting burned for this. One of the things that bothers me is, because I do believe, and I can prove it, that the way the public schools goes, our nation goes, one of the things that concerns me is that when we look at our Metro North into New York City is packed with working men and women. And I think for us to think that we can take from New York City what we want and protect our education and draw like an invisible wall to protect our education here in the suburbs is not visionary at all, and it hurts the entire United States. And I think we have to be a lot more community-minded and to understand that we need to care about our schools, our public schools in New York City. Many of those young people will be moving up here if they can. We're losing jobs. We can't pick and choose what we want from New York, take it, bring it here, take the income and the luxury and lavish lifestyle, and what happens in New York City. We need to care about public schools in New York, and there are a lot of great public schools in New York, including the South Bronx.
Thank you. Do you have a specific question you'd like to ask?
Yes. Are we? Well, you know, while you laugh, I think it's important to understand that our visionary is shortchanged. So our question is, what is it with our public school system here in Westchester that there is a lack of vision in understanding that nothing that is happening today should have surprised us? So how do we? It's not just about the tax cap. What do we do in order to educate people that are here to understand that the consequences of what happens in a city as powerful as New York, that we could transfer that social contract that we have to care?
Well, I think, you know, both Bob and I would agree, I think, that public education in general is important. Certainly the city has been a wonderful springboard for many people for many, many years. It has different issues than we have here in Westchester County. And people pay differently in the city than they do in Westchester County. the direct dollars that you pay in terms of property taxes goes to your local public school is very clearly evident in the county. It is not as clear in the city. And what has happened in the city is lots of the dollars have been siphoned off. So the wealthy in the city tend often not to send their children to the public schools or to send them to select public schools and make other decisions for their kids. So the tax structure is different in the city. The implications of the tax cap is different for New York City. It is not the same as it's being applied to the suburban communities. So it is different. And right now, there is a problem with what's happening in terms of the funding mechanism and the fairness of the funding mechanism in the state. In Rhinebeck, for example, all we receive in state aid is about 4%. That's all we receive at this point. It's less than $1 million on a $35 million budget. It's decreased over time so much. Why? Because everybody in this room is considered to be very wealthy. It doesn't matter that what the wealth ratio is. Everybody in the room is considered wealthy because we come from Westchester County. George Latterman tells me that all the time. But this is a wealthy place, and it's a hard battle when he fights in Albany for us because he's fighting against people who say, everybody in Westchester is millionaires. They have these fancy public schools, and nobody really cares. We're paying for the fancy public schools. We're paying for the opportunity to provide that for our students. If that needs to happen, then the state needs to step in and set a meeting for what has to happen throughout the state.
Any other questions? Penny?
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned you were seeking relief from mandates, and that committee. Could you talk a little bit about, if you can, what mandates you're targeting?
Yep. We had a couple of mandates that we're looking at. We have 4, actually. One of the mandates is about transportation. Last year, Rhinebeck took on a goal, actually last 2 years, over a 2-year period. We decided that we were going to try to put our private and parochial school students, we have 107 of them in Rhinebeck. It was costing us over $700,000 to transport public and private school students alone to their private schools. So parents were making decisions to send their kids to private school, and we were paying the transport, which is required under state law, as a result of a deal that Cardinal Spellman made with Rockefeller. So it goes back that far. It was funded at 90% when that deal was made. It is now funded at 4%. So at one point, it really wasn't a big hit to local schools. Now it is a big hit to local schools. So what we did last year was my business official worked very hard at putting every student we could on public transport. That meant if you were going to Fordham Prep, you took the train to Fordham Prep. If you were going to the French American School, you took the Beeline bus to the French American School, wherever possible, because the bus routes are not very convenient. We did it for students age 5 through 12, everybody in school, just like it's a parental decision whether you would decide to send your child walking to Rhinebeck or riding the bikes or driving them to school. And the district saved almost $300,000. We want to continue that initiative, so that's one of the things, by reducing the amount of mileage. I have to send students to Connecticut. I have to send students to the Riverdale schools. As a result of this, in some cases, I was sending 4 students to Rye Country Day from Greenhaven. It was costing the district $26,000 to send the 4 students to that school. So transportation is one area we're looking at. We're looking at the special ed requirements and in terms of the rigor in which New York State is beyond the federal government expectation. So we're looking at that piece. Those are 2 major areas that we're trying to concentrate on. And then transportation for special needs students. We have a mileage transportation right now that we have an obligation to send special needs students over 50 miles away. So we're reducing that to 25 miles. So if a parent makes a decision to send a child to a particular school, they have to be within a reasonable amount of space. So those are the mandates that we're looking at right now, because we hear from the state and from the governor he's not interested in pension reform, which would be the relief that we would really need. He's not interested in releasing us of the mandate of the tri-borough, which would be an interesting thing for him to take on, and he's not interested in releasing us from health care, which, by the way, New Jersey with the tax cap at least allowed those 2 mandates reliefs. So.
This is an esoteric question, but you have a sophisticated audience here. Many of us know that 2% is not actually 2%. So do you want to just explain that? Because here you have some people who could bring out that message when the budgets come out, people say that's not 2%.
Right. 2% is not, it's on your taxes. It's actually on the tax levy. And I think that is certainly an important point because it really speaks to the amount that a school district can grow based on the prior year's assessment in terms of the tax levy. So that's what we mean. Now, it's interesting because this is a different formula than New Jersey, as Peter has suggested. But what we want to point out to people is that if the taxpayer is assuming then when they receive their tax bill based on working under the cap, that their tax rate will not increase by 2%, and that is just not true. So the formula works with as follows. You start off looking at your current tax levy and using the growth formula. They take into consideration what they say is the annual growth of a community, which in consideration of Mamaroneck and Larchmont will be limited, so in terms of that factor. There are some exemptions for capital and building, as well as what I will say is for retirement costs or pension costs that exceed a 2% increase. That you will certainly arrive within your acceptable rate of growth in terms of the increase in your tax levy from the prior year. It's important to note a couple things about the formula. One, it's either 2% or CPI, whichever is lower, I believe. And in this particular case, CPI certainly has been above 2%, so we don't think that's likely for the coming year. And that's important to understand that when we talk about the formula, and that's what we're considering and trying to understand. It does build on the base, and so similar to Massachusetts, once a budget is passed, it builds on that base from the prior year, and that's certainly important. But there are a couple things to understand. One, you present a budget, and the budgets have to be voted on. If you choose to go for an override or above that, and it does not pass, you can continue to put that budget forward. But if it fails a second time, you actually are facing a zero increase in your budget. So there's a huge risk to kind of understanding the kind of formula for understanding your budget and your needs and the expectation that the community has around working within this tax cap. I want to point out also that there's a distinction between how school districts have to work under a tax cap and municipal governments. And that's important because as much as certainly as our municipal partners have to look at their budgets and understand how they're going to continue to provide services, they're not putting that out to a public vote. And we are. The other thing I want to mention is if you go for an override in New York State, it is a supermajority, and that was purposeful in the governor's thinking. My experience in Massachusetts is that an override proposition has always been simply a majority vote. That is, if you have 51 votes against 49, that measure will pass, and that kind of rings true to this idea of one person, one vote. And so it's an extraordinary and difficult challenge to not only explain the tax cap formula, but to kind of operate and figure out how you're going to kind of, in some ways, look at this not in 1 year, but in several years.
Harold?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. Apart from finances and taxes. I'd like to ask a question about what you do every day in educating our students. I'd like to know two things. One, what percentage in each school district of students, what percentage do not go on to college? And second, what are you doing to prepare these non-college students for life in a period ahead which is very uncertain and where jobs are scarce and resources are scarce?
So I'm proud to say that 94% of our students graduate. Last year, 94% of our high school seniors graduated from high school. That being said, I think the Mamaroneck Public Schools are doing a number of things to certainly not only meet the needs of our graduates, but to help them understand their future. We have committed resources for a transition program where we're helping students who aren't attending college to think about job and career and really creating opportunities and partnerships with many of our local businesses to have students start to do some job shadow and direct job experiences so that they have a sense of what's possible beyond high school. And so we think that's critically important. We also have tried to act early on with a number of our students who we see are at risk for either not graduating or not continuing on to higher education, and starting to introduce this idea of success for all and college for all. So taking a number of students to visits to colleges as freshmen to get a sense of how we can help families think about and plan for and set that high bar for college. It was really interesting. I was in a class of our Apple, our alternative high school, and it was an English lesson. And so you asked what we do, and one of the things I like to do is visit classrooms. And the lesson was really about college, yes or no. And it was a way to really look at statistics and have students understand and kind of come to the realization that if you go on to college and graduate with a degree, your lifestyle, your earning power, your future will be dramatically different from someone who doesn't go on to college. And it was interesting to watch students kind of look at the research, kind of debate, given the cost of schooling, is this a realistic option? And then come to their own conclusions about how this option of college was extremely important. And then they were asking important questions about how we can help them get there. So I think it's important, one, is to personalize this experience for each student and their families. Two, to create the resources through transition programs and creative job training programs for students who will either defer college if, immediately graduating high school, or in some ways help them prepare for the future. And those are some of the things we're doing at this point. You know that under No Child Left Behind, actually, our goal is that all students will meet graduation requirements and proficiencies. And so in some ways, that is our mandate. And I think, just philosophically, we believe that we want all learners to learn to high levels and create a situation when they leave us that they can plot a future that, whether it's work, college, or in some way, some combination, that they have the greatest opportunity for success in the future.
In Rhinebeck, we have, over the last 3 years, between 97 and 98% of our students going on to college. We've had 1 or 2 students go off to the military and or work. So a very high percentage of our students go off to college. I think it's based on a couple of things. We have a program running called SIP, a Senior Internship Program, where all of our seniors go out and work for 6 months in various 6 weeks. Pardon me. It would be 6 months is a long time. 6 weeks. They go out for 6 weeks and they work in industry. They work in either they work in the city at corporate jobs or they work locally, depending on what their interest is. We match them up. They go out. They have an experience of what it is to be out in the field of work, and I think that reality check is very important. It teaches them what's required when you go into the workforce. And I think it really sets a tone for what the expectation is. I would almost hope that it would start earlier, because I think a lot of students would wake up earlier about what they really want to do. But we do it as seniors as they finish most of their coursework. There are also a lot of opportunities, as Bob said. Our students go off to college visits on a regular basis. We take our young ladies off to Harvard every year to a women's in science program. We have independent study programs. There's a trip next week to alumni schools where our staff takes students off to where they went to college. So they take them off to local colleges where they have gone to colleges, all in an effort to help students understand that the quality of life is much different when you have the opportunity to go on to higher education. As Bob said, I think that's the key. Instilling in young people the fact that it's important to be the best you can, to be everything you can, and that's going to come with education and time. And then our guidance department works from 9th grade on, helping students understand that everybody can go to college, that there are opportunities for people, whether it's through grants, if money's an issue, or whether it's through opportunities to pick the right school and to start out perhaps at a local community college and then move on from there. But the sense that you can do it, you have the ability and the skill set to do it.
I just want to add also, we have strong partnerships with BOCES, and there's a number of students who participate in what I would say is off-site vocational programs. As we know, we had a presentation, a number of students who are working through our BOCES vocational training program, that the job opportunities are certainly there for students to go right into the workforce, and start to really build a career. And I think that is another viable option. It's realistic. I think that more students are going to look at that as well. So we are trying to provide a lot of opportunities and choice as we help students think about their future.
I just wanted to add it. Right after, we have also that Managing Your Future course for all juniors.
Right.
It's like a half credit course where they build their resume, and it's a good preparation. And I think when we talk tax cap, it has such implications, and one of the big implications, I think, is in guidance, because that's where school districts will probably look to cut. You're not taking a teacher out, has a huge impact, because that ratio of students to counselors is key in terms of giving the personalized attention, getting the kids prepared for their future. Question, Ann?
Hi there. I really enjoyed your answers about education, but I do have a question about finance and taxes.
Sure.
A great deal of the impetus for tax caps is because of the increased real estate taxes. And real estate taxes are also sort of the basis of local control. Do you, down the road, see any relief from the state in the form of broadly based tax, state income tax, funding more and more local education? And how do you think local control could be maintained given that impetus?
I'm not very optimistic that there'll be any type of relief from the state. I mean, I think if you look historically in New York State, there's actually been obviously a sharp reduction in funding coming from Albany over the last 20 years, and so I don't see how that in any way is going to reverse the trends. I actually think that there's more of an interest from Albany in consolidation. That in some ways this is a purposeful attempt to kind of, in terms of municipalities and school systems, to consolidate. I can say from my experience in Massachusetts, Proposition 2.5, in some ways, there was an underlying current of that same idea, that how do we get towns and services to combine into, in some ways, to larger entities, and so that instead of providing aid for, thousands, you're reducing that by looking at regionalization and consolidation. So I actually think we're not heading in that direction at all. And so I still think that for the majority, it's going to be a local decision around property tax and the value that people see in their public schools. I think as Peter started out, there is this kind of relationship between home prices and the quality of education. And I think certainly our goal is to continue to demonstrate the value we offer as a public entity that is competing with a lot of privatization in educational services. And so it's beholden to us to demonstrate our value, our worth, and the investment of people in the community. And to me, that's the kind of thing we're focusing on now, to show how the things we're doing are both innovative and certainly important for the future of students. And we hope that that will be the working formula.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Bob. I don't think there's any money coming from the state, any more money coming from the state. I actually think it's going to be less. It's pretty obvious that we're not getting more money from the state, and it will fall on local taxpayers.
This may sound counterintuitive, but what about using shared services to fight consolidation? And what I'm saying is, okay, and I'm just going to go on a little bit. I work with the City Board of Education, and they always gave in to parents who had lawyers, because they could out-lawyer the Board of Ed. And we had one case where we sent this kid to a residential treatment center in Madison, Connecticut for about this was many years ago, about $58,000. Because, and what I'm getting to this point is, what about shared services? In other words, experts who can work in that area. Also, what about combining transportation through different districts for the bus situation? I'm talking about using shared services to fight consolidation.
Well, just so you know, Bob and I and a group of superintendents are part of what's called the Sound Shore Consortium. So we've been working for the last 15 years about sharing services and sharing opportunities, and exactly what you mentioned. For example, in special education, we share opportunities. Our special ed directors meet on a regular basis. We create opportunities within the school systems that are more competitive even than our BOCES, which was created to be a shared service in the region. And the purpose of that is for parents to be able to make this, for school districts to be able to make decisions, for example, so that I can send a student from my school to a program that Bob is running in his school, or vice versa. I have 3 students right now that are coming to us from Rye, and we set a lower tuition rate. So that's one of the things. We also consolidate, wherever possible, transportation routes, bidding services, equipment services, those kinds of things. However, there are restrictions, and there are legislative restrictions on what we can and can't do, which is really one of the issues that we're beginning to look at. Please don't do that, because George has been a wonderful help to us and a strong supporter of public education. So he has been the person who he has been our go-to guy, who has been the person who, well, I have to tell you, he has been our go-to guy. He has been the person who's been there for public education. He has been the person who's put his reputation and name on the line, and perhaps his opportunities on the line as a result of being willing to say, this is what I believe in I believe in public education. This is how it's going to happen. So I feel a very strong friend in George. But the one issue that we do have is we have looked at that. Schools have, over the last number of years, cut resources, cut expenses, trimmed what we're doing, consolidated what we're working at, shared services, worked at consolidating issues. This is not something new to schools. We've done this over the last 3 or 5 years. Part of the issue is we've been careful with managing our money over the last number of years. And the question is, at what point can you stop being careful and it starts hurting? You start bleeding. George?
I just wanted to make one comment about consolidation because I think it's a timely topic. I think Bob said it, or was Peter that said it, because I've had dialogue with both of these gentlemen and their colleagues in the other communities that I represent. It's hard for you to appreciate this fully because we live where we live. This is one of the unique states where 40% of the population of this state lives in one consolidated governmental unit called the City of New York. Many of you lived in the city at some point in time. I've lived and worked in the city at various times in my life as well. The attitude of not just the governor, but many of my colleagues who represent the city is that on its face, suburban jurisdictions, towns and villages, small cities, as well as school districts, are an unnecessary duplicative government. I've had conversations, both heated and thoughtful, over dinner or across the chamber floor, of people who represent sections of Queens and Brooklyn. And their attitude is, you have Rye Neck, Rye City, Rye Brook, Rye Town. Why don't you just consolidate it? Now I tell them, come with me. Before you draw a judgment, come with me. Go in and out of the communities I represent and talk to people who like having their local fire department, their local police department, their local schools. But the attitude that many of them have, and this is implicit in what was said, is when we talk about changing the funding structure to what would be a more fair situation, which would be an income tax structure. In essence, what Lou said to start the conversation is where we need to go. We need to get away from the wealth of the community governing how much can be spent for education. It ought to be the collective wealth of the state that provides a solid baseline for a kid. I know, I grew up in the south side, you've heard this before. I grew up in the south side of Mount Vernon, in one of the poorest neighborhoods in this county. And I know exactly, personally, exactly what this is. But there is a pressure for consolidation. And this tax cap proposal, the consolidation bill that passed a couple of years ago, is part of that pressure. And I think it's going to get more and more worse. Now, if that does come to pass, you lose control over things that you'd like to see. If you have a county school district, if you have a county fire department, you have to ask yourself, is that better or worse for me? The mission should be to raise up Mount Vernon, Port Chester, the city, to a level. Put the money necessary to make those schools as competitive as the Mamaronecks and the Ryes. Not to say, well, we're going to save money and get it down to a level. And if you don't believe me, come with me to my old alma mater, Mount Vernon. It breaks my heart, absolutely breaks my heart, to go into the very rooms that I walked into as a kid and see that they don't get the same amount of resources that somebody else does. And I think Peter's comment up front is very true. If we head to this sort of consolidation because it sounds good, we're going to dumb down the good that we have, and we're not going to raise up what's bad. That's an opinion.
This is a little out of context now, but going back to the Journal News article and the crumbling, infrastructure, how realistic going forward is the tax cap if they don't give you some relief for infrastructure concerns?
Well, there is
because thank God right now we have debt that we can retire and roll over and whatever. But if anything happened that was on the catastrophic nature to any of our buildings or infrastructure, what would that mean for the school?
I think certainly, I mean, we know the conditions of our buildings. We know the challenges we face, and we can't ignore them. This idea that you can just defer maintenance and so on is a symptom of what I would say is what's happened in California, Massachusetts, living under that cap. I think we are trying to, in terms of understanding our needs, to not put the burden heavily on the taxpayers, but to think about all the issues that relate to working under a cap, meeting our needs in terms of long-term, short-term plans for our capital improvements, and in some ways how we can kind of ask our citizens to take care of all of that in a thoughtful way. There are some exclusions for debt as part of this formula, and so we have to be mindful of that. But I think, so while that's realistic and that certainly helps our cause, I think what we are kind of combating is this idea of, as we ask taxpayers in some instances to support an override just for the operation of our schools, how do we have them understand the needs, the capital needs, that in some ways are there and true, and so we overburden our taxpayers in terms of asking them to support all of that. I think we want to first and foremost kind of lay out to the community to be very transparent in terms of what our building needs are over the next 10 years, and then how do we work strategically to figure out to meet those needs, because as George mentioned, it's one thing to have a school, but when it's falling apart, we aren't creating the conditions for our students. So we have to understand how to use the work under the tax cap formula, understand the exemptions and how we can understand our capital. Think about the strategies that we can use in terms of capital reserves, bonds over time, and funding mechanisms that can take care of a lot of our capital needs as well. But this is a real issue.
I agree.
I have one for you that sort of follows on that. What's your view of private fundraising to make up for budget gaps?
It's illegal.
Well, it's illegal. It's illegal to do it just, you can't pay for play. So you can't have people come in and just, a person come in and say, I want to support X team, and that's the only piece I want to support. And I have to tell you, we've wrestled with this, Heidi knows, about groups of people. We had an interesting situation where people really wanted a particular team in place, and the board wrestled with it for a long time, because what you don't want to start happening is special interest groups deciding what's important and what's not important in your schools. I had the opportunity this summer to visit my son, who lives in, one of my silly sons lives out in California. He made that bad decision a number of years ago. And I went to visit him, and I was talking to his boss. He works for HGTV, and a plug for HGTV, so please watch because you'll want to keep him employed. His boss sends her child to the local public school in Santa Monica. And I said, wow, I'm surprised given the condition of the schools that I've seen, and I went and visited a couple of the elementary schools while I was out there. And she said to me, well, the reason I do that is because I raise money every year. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, collectively we've raised $600,000. My jaw dropped. I said, how did you manage that? She said, well, you have to understand that it's part of our culture now, and it's part of what we do. So we had the conversation a little bit more, and she said, oh, tonight I'm meeting with the principal of the building, and we're going to talk about how we want the money spent. So I said to him, I said to her, she says, what's wrong? I said, what would you know about how the money should be spent? You're not on the school board, and you're not a school administrator. She said, no, but we all helped raise the money, so we have a vested interest. That's what happens when people donate money or have it. They believe very strongly they can do it. I think we're going to look at, I know in our community we put together a committee to look at long-term fundraising and how that can help us and what the options might be, because realistically we want to be sure that we can accommodate some needs that we have, maybe a special project down the road or so forth. But it is the responsibility of a school community to pay for what they think schools need to have in place for every student that goes there.
Just to add to this, I just want to say that certainly we continue to appreciate the generosity of our school foundation and how they support and enrich the activities of our students. But in New York State, it is the responsibility of the Board of Education and the community to provide for the program that students are expected to experience during the day in terms of the graduation requirements and the courses. So it's not realistic. I think, again, going back to my experience in Massachusetts, they have adapted well to having the flexibility under state law to use private funds to support their programs at a cost, because to play a sport in Massachusetts In high school, it's almost $1,500 to participate, and 10 years ago it was $35. And then so it continues to, the schools continue to rely and expect parents to pay those fees just to maintain the programs. And what that has allowed them to do then, in some ways, save their core programs, because they've taken the money that would normally support athletics, the band, and the arts, and just target that for the schools. So it's really not a great strategy over time. And in New York State, it certainly is not even allowable at this time. So I don't see that we continue certainly to look at creative opportunities through booster clubs, and obviously appreciate the support of the foundations. Rena, you had a question.
I'm just going to build on what Carolyn asked, because I'm a little bit confused about the capital improvement part of how that would all fit in. Could you just explain it, I'm sorry to do this to you, a little bit more about whether the state has any exemptions for capital improvements,
exempted.
how you would fund.
It is exempted.
Well, that I just and how it would impact, say, a budget vote.
You would, a capital bond vote would be separate from a budget vote. So you would have your operating vote.
What about the debt service?
That would be part of how you would fund it, through your debt service.
And is that part of the budget? Would that come under the 2% cap?
No.
No.
Okay, so that's what I want.
Not from my understanding of how the
Is that
legislation.
current debt service or future debt service? Current debt service is exempted, you know?
No, debt service is exempt.
Is exempted.
All.
Yeah.
Current, I mean, what you have on the books now and any
And in
future
future.
capital projects.
Well, you know, the example is Rye City is now going out for a bond of $25 million. Capital bonds are usually are separate bond votes. It's a separate vote. It can happen at the same time as the general election operating vote, but it happens as a separate vote. So people decide whether they want to pay for a bond or not. You might have seen just recently Eastchester passed a school bond for repairs. Rice City's putting up a bond, I believe it's just in a couple of weeks, for $25 million. Those are separate votes, but you can have them at the same time as you actually have your regular operating vote. But regardless of when you have it, it's separate and apart. And my understanding, at least right now, is it's exempt from the cap at this point. So you can do capital construction without a problem.
For all of us, as the gentleman has spoken.
Pay for the debt service.
You're going to pay for it.
To support a tax increase that is higher than 2%, even though it's legally allowed. Because if it's defeated
Correct.
twice, as they have said,
Right.
we're down to zero, and that would have to absorb the
right.
debt service.
That would have to absorb the debt
Which
service.
means that there would be even less for programs.
I mean, debt service isn't optional, I totally understand that, you have to pay the debt service.
Right.
You know, I think one other point I want to mention, as we think about the strategies looking at working under a tax cap, a lot of our assumptions are that our revenue in some ways will remain the same. That is, we will not lose revenue. And looking at the projections in the state budget, I certainly am waiting and holding my breath to understand what state aid will look like and how that may affect us, along with sales tax and other revenues that we count on. And so it may create a even more challenging situation, because we have to really pay attention to the revenue side of the equation to understand to what degree we have to use reserves and so forth. And one of the things we'll point out on December 5th is that using our reserves to kind of, in some ways, soften or offset is not a long-term solution. That when we run our models, it's clear that our reserves in a very short period of time will be exhausted. And I think we, certainly have rely on the fact that if we need to use our reserves strategically over time, that those reserves are there for really purposes that will support our work, but not take away from our ability to deliver a program. So I think there's two sides to this. One, we're watching revenue and understanding how that may change our thinking. And two, we know, in fact, that we don't have just this luxury of applying reserves over multiple years to kind of offset the increases in our expenditures. And that's really important to understand.
In Rye Neck, we don't have the reserves to spend. So we've limited that over the years. We've been very careful about not reserving lots of money for the future. We've been very efficient and effective in how we budget And that going into this process, it's going to hurt us. It's going to take more of an effort for us to overcome it, because we don't have reserves to throw at this problem. So although we're going to try to manage it, it's going to be a problem for us.
Okay, we're going to take one last question. Lee.
Getting back to the teaching staff itself and all the controversy about how that staff is evaluating. Have you changed your evaluation procedures because of these mandates?
Well, I think to some extent, but I have to tell you, in my heart of hearts, we have an outstanding staff that works really hard, that we've hired. They've done a great job. We've hired them well. They're very carefully screened through the process. We vet them very carefully through the process. So this isn't new to us. We have multiple observations. We've used the Danielson model for many years, which is a nationally recognized model in our school district. I have principals who are very active participants in it. I participate in it. It's a very good structure, and our goal is to constantly improve the quality of teaching and learning, and we're doing that, and we've done it. I've said to the commissioner on numerous occasions, we should be the models for what you need to put in place for evaluation, because I really feel strongly that the results are evident. They speak for themselves. Our students do well on the state testing. They do so well. We don't even use that as the barometer. We go beyond that as the barometer. But beyond that, our students are college and career ready. You have 97, 98% of our students going off to colleges. That doesn't happen by happenstance. It happens by quality teaching every day in a classroom with strong programs. So we have a good model in place. This is requiring us to do a lot of paperwork, a lot of data collection, a lot of resources that are going, in my opinion, in the wrong direction to accommodate a plan that really isn't appropriate for Rhinebeck, at least.
Yeah, just to echo Peter's point, I think certainly we're very proud of what's happening in our classroom each day. We have our staff, the quality of our teaching staff, and the high standards we set for student learning. I think we tried to say, given the set of circumstances in terms of the mandate from Albany about teacher evaluation, how do we kind of understand that in the context of our own philosophy, our local philosophy, our belief systems? One of the things that I'm very proud of this year, we have been working with a model supervision that really encourages principals to visit classrooms every day and provide teachers with immediate feedback. My personal goal is to get into every classroom. I've seen over 85 teachers this year, and my goal is to actually be able to visit every class, 440 classrooms in terms of teachers. But this active supervision model of observing in small chunks, providing immediate feedback, we believe really supports this idea of continuous improvement in teaching and learning. And teachers really like to talk about their work and engage in conversations in the moment and just touch on what they were trying to accomplish and the quality of learning. And so for us, we are again trying to kind of shut out what I think are the mandates, but really stay true to our vision of what, as Peter mentioned, good teaching looks like and excellence in the classroom. And that's where we're going to continue to focus our efforts.
Harold has one more.
Right. I'd like to bring the issue back to the first questioner. Luis Quiros said that Mamaroneck and Larchmont are communities that draw much of their income from New York City, and that we have a responsibility to the New York City betterment and the betterment of the school system there. George Latimer said that he went back to his old school and he was heartbroken to see what is happening in Mount Vernon. So I ask you two gentlemen who are in charge of the school systems in this, must be a fairly wealthy town if 98 or 97% of the students go on to college. Is there, in a democratic sense, lower D, small d, is there any responsibility that we have to some of these other communities that are going to be hurt much more than we through the cap, as you say they will? So
I think superintendents have been unified in voicing their concern that a tax cap really will hurt communities based on wealth. And it's very clear that we have said that for the communities that are challenged, that they will continue to struggle with this idea of supporting overrides versus other communities. And so I don't think it's safe to kind of place that on superintendents or a community in terms of responsibility. As George tried to suggest, it's a collective responsibility. The state, the federal government, schools have been locally controlled, and really is the kind of principle of our public education system to really engage a community in determining the quality and the investment in their schools. And I think we certainly support that. But I mean, the point I also want to make is that this is a very interconnected world, and we realize what happens not only in New York City, but in the state, in the country, in Europe. We're all impacted by decisions that people make, governments, and institutions. And so I think it's that idea of coalition and the public good is what we really want to focus on. We all believe as superintendents that students should have the equity of opportunity to learn and have opportunity for the future. And how do we kind of voice and stand together to ensure that we are concerned equally at what's happening in Mount Vernon or Portchester, Mamaroneck, and Rhinebeck, and that it's not just about our own district. And I think we have tried to have a collective voice together across the state as superintendents to ensure this issue of equity, but we can't do it alone. I mean, it really is about a partnership at the state level, looking at funding formulas and so on, and we can't move a mountain. We need the help and support of a coalition that goes beyond just our voices.
I think what we're hearing from the state, which is really interesting, is that this cap is creating more division, upstate versus downstate. What's happening in rural communities as opposed to what's happening in suburban communities. Last week we traveled out to Long Island to meet with a group of superintendents in Long Island, and we're hearing from Long Island superintendents that among the districts on Long Island there's now this divide between the haves and the have-nots. You're going to see it within the county as that happens. This putting on an artificial cap that says this is the level that you can go to is so. It has such a negative impact in terms of what it might do to divide the state in terms of public education, whether it's the city school districts or whether it's rural school districts or whether it's suburban school districts. I think that's the issue. From my point of view, local control is the primary issue here. We need to maintain local control, whether it's in New York City, whether it's in the suburban communities or the rural communities. People in their community need to decide what's right for their community. That's what we need to do. That's what has worked successfully and enabled us to be able to do what we can do so well.
But part of that responsibility is educating our citizens, and I encourage you certainly to attend our December 5th discussion about the tax cap. Hopefully we'll do a better job of really unpacking and explaining to you in detail the formula so you have a clear sense of what it is and what it's not. And it certainly is not a 2% tax cap that relates to your own taxes, or in some ways that your taxes will not grow by more than 2% when you receive your tax bill. That I know is clear and evident. But it really is in terms of educating parents and community members so they can be involved and have really a voice in our discussion. And in the end, this idea of local control is really important. What I appreciate about my Massachusetts experience is the notion of a town meeting where people can ask questions, people can stand up to a microphone and talk about and ask you about your budget. There's a sense of transparency and responsibility, but it encourages people to vote and participate. And our message, again, is that we ask that you talk to your neighbors and fellow citizens and get them involved in the process, because we feel we can explain and certainly describe what we believe in our vision for the schools, and I think that is evident.
Dr. Shabs, Dr. Mustick, thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi.
We really appreciate you taking all the questions and answers, and that's very helpful for us, and we appreciate all the time you set aside for that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your show promise.
Yeah.
The date
Go on the
of the
road.
next summit board meeting is actually the 29th. This is not the public, our board meeting skips next week because that's Thanksgiving week.